The Washington Post has once again come up with a report slamming India. The report, titled "How India Tamed Twitter and Set a Global Standard for Online Censorship," and states that the Indian government has dramatically tightened its grip on American social media companies. The report states that Silicon Valley firms that were at times defiant are now far more accepting of the Indian government and how the Indian government dictates censorship on materials. However, Union Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar has lashed out at the media outlet for its article on India and said that it attempts to connect unrelated dots and has distorted certain facts. Calling out the report, the minister said that it is a sad, struggling effort to invent a story based on coffee table discussions, relying on anonymous sources. He also put out a point-by-point rebuttal of the report and has exposed the hard facts that the report seemingly and conveniently has ignored. We'll talk about this with our guest. Joining us on the show is Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat. Professor D.K. Giri, international affairs expert, also joins us on the show. Sumit Peer, senior political commentator, with us on the program. And last but not the least, Mr. Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, joining us on the program as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, ma'am, I'll begin with you. Not the first time that the Washington Post has been so magnanimous with its compliments and its appreciation for how India operates. If you catch my drift, I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I'm just trying to tell you that they have been targeting India, and they have been, in fact, doing something similar with TikTok as well, which is supposed to be a Chinese app. But yet it's India that's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to defaming us or naming us in reports that really are not connected in any way or not even corroborated in any way.
Well, Vineet, sometimes it seems to me that Washington Post and The Economist compete with each other in defaming India. In fact, if ever I see a single sentence complimentary about India in either publication, I immediately cut it out and put it so that I can use it in the future when they defame us again. In this really, it is just unbelievable, their animosity. And this animosity has been there from independence. Because when we were poor, when we were very poor after colonialism, and you were not even born, the Western media used to paint us as hungry, starving Indians, wasting their money in building IITs, in going in for space technology, etc. They used to show us regularly with the begging bowl outside the World Bank, etc. As we've become stronger and richer and more prosperous and more important and matter more, these gentlemen who, because it's a very male-dominated setup out there, Vineet, I'm sorry to tell you, these gentlemen cannot swallow India's rise. And so from time to time, they find something to defame us. Today it's about IT or about so-called censorship. Last week's Economist carried a long article about how Indian haldi is poisoning millions of people in Bangladesh, etc. So there is no shortage of topics in which to defame India. In this particular case, I am very proud of our minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, who has given a very robust and yet logical rebuttal of the points raised, because I think they seem to forget that they have often indulged in far greater censorship of their online giants, and they've got away with it. Whereas all that we have said from time to time is that there should be responsible reporting, because rights go with responsibilities. That didn't come from Narendra Modi or from India. That is what Mill said about liberty. So I'm not inventing it. It's because I've had a colonial education, so I learned it in school. But rights and responsibilities go together. All we are asking the social media giants and Twitter is to be responsible in what they report, because if you are irresponsible, it can lead not only to law and order situation, but to carnage, looting, etc. And what has the West done? When the West, in similar situations or even more complicated situations, have actually disconnected the net, and nobody's ever criticized them. So I think, and finally, Vineet, I'd like to tell those who run Washington Post or Economist that in India, who cares Who reads Washington Post and Economist? Who discusses them except a few English media channels in India? Nobody cares. Today is Diwali. The country is rejoicing. We have done better than ever before. Our economy is booming. If they don't like our rise, well, too bad. Why don't they like our rise, Vineet? Because as we rise, they sink. That's a fundamental law of mathematics. We are rising, they are sinking. So this is going to get worse and worse, Vineet. We will have to develop thicker and thicker skins because the criticism is going to get more and more virulent as we become richer, richer, richer and richer.
Absolutely, ma'am. You've articulated it quite eloquently. And Sumit Peer, ma'am is absolutely right. You can't be successful without creating certain enemies. But Sumit, for the sake of argument, let's also look at what, some misinformation has done to the United States as well. If you remember the insurrection that happened on the 6th of January in 2021, that was obviously a result of what Donald Trump said, but also a result of what he was putting out on Twitter. So they have a first-hand experience of what Twitter, now X, is actually capable of. But do you think, Sumit, that we need to take the Washington Post seriously? Gone are the days of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who in fact exposed Richard Nixon in the Watergate scandal. This is perhaps an organization which is trying to stay afloat, and it needs to be sensational, and that's exactly what it's doing. And perhaps India is that guinea pig that they're using.
Vinny, thank you very much for having me on your show. First of all, a very happy Deepavali, Dhanteras, Bhaiya Duj and Govardhan to you, all the panelists and all the viewers who are watching us across the India. What is important is desperate times, desperate measures. These people, these publications are sinking. Who is putting money in them? Understand where does the money come from? That is where the agenda comes from. That is where the dictation comes from. That is where the propaganda comes from. So these people are trying to be afloat. By putting such articles, at least they get some TRP. We talk about them. A lot of people would have known from your telecast. There's something called Washington Post. There's something called, XYZ who still exists. Otherwise, who cares about them? If you look at the circulation of Dainik Jagar and Dainik Bhaskar, that is 10 times or 20 times that of, I'm talking for UP publication, that is 20 times that of, these two Firang publications. So the impact factor of these publications is good to zero. They live in their colonial hangover. They are the dinosaurs of the Jurassic era who are run from the Jurassic Park, by the way. That's what they are. And if you talk about the censorship, let me give you for example, Delhi riots, there were 800 Twitter handles operated by IS, right? Where did all the ISIS recruitment happen? Twitter. Now, if you look at, when President Donald Trump was here, again, fake propaganda, Twitter, and social media for that matter. Hijab Hurab, social media. Kisan Andolan, social media. So when you see a long list of plethora where social media is, used...
Not even that, Sumit. If you look at the recent Parali burning episodes, there was a headline on the website of Washington Post which read, "Living Hell."
Correct. And even when Prime Minister Modi was trying to, make an India vaccine, you have seen how much of, rot they had written literally on there. So these people are habitual offenders, and when they are exposed, and let me remind them of one company. I heard of one company beneath called Cambridge Analytica. Ab pata nahi yaar ye kya karti hai. I don't know which NGO do they run. So how does Cambridge Analytica work? Who goes with the Cambridge Analytica? Who was the customer of Cambridge Analytica in India? So aap bataiye na. So when you are influencing law and order, when you are influencing the progress of country, when you are influencing the elections of the country, and when the government of India sets certain parameters, you have a problem, and these parameters are uniform for all. They're not, it's not that Twitter has one parameters and Pooh has another parameters. They are both are same. It's not an Indian app has different parameters and American app has different parameters. No. If you want to talk of censorship, you have to go to People's Republic of China and let Washington Post write about that. That is where the censorship happens. You have more than 1,000 satellite news channels. There are more than 4 lakh publications. In the United States, you have 70 satellite channels and around 4,500 publications. You can see the contrast. If censorship is happening here, then God save the whole world. There's nothing called censorship. But yes, looking at the national security, looking at our well-being, looking at our progress, looking at the cost of capital, looking at this malicious propaganda, we have to control it. What are people like Cambridge Analytica doing? Because we need... Remember, Prime Minister Modi has said that 2024 तक हम पे आघात बढ़ने वाला है. The attacks are going to get more and more and more. This is what exactly is happening. They are not able to influence the election of 2024. They are rattled. They are not influence the rise of Prime Minister Modi in BJP. They are rattled. They are not able to influence the rise of India. They are rattled. And the most important thing I want to bring you to notice when all this is happening, they have this problem. How come this so-called country of snake charmers and beggars and all that, those hallucinations they used to live in, how come they are able to dictate terms to American companies? And today, American companies are doing salam. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ye ego ki ladai hai. It's more of a fight of a ego. How can Indians dictate terms to an American white 6.5-inch Gora with brown hair and green eyes, and these Indians are dictating the terms? And Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who's a techie, he has a lot of patents to his name. He has given a beautiful rebuttal, one by one. I like the coffee table one. That is my favorite. So these people who think that there is censorship and all, they don't know. Let them go to China, let them go to Pakistan, let them go to North Korea, let them go to all 57 Muslim countries, 57 Musalman mulk. You will know what censorship is about. You will know what it is about. The most liberal and the most free media is in India. And Vinny, let me tell you, I want to give you a compliment. You are more famous in India than the editor of Washington Post. I don't know who he is. No, I don't know in India how many people know him. More people will know you. I can give that in writing. And your channel, NewsX, will be definitely watched maybe 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times than the people who read Washington Post. I mean, they still live in that Lala's land. They still live in a cocoon. They still live in Alice in Wonderland. Well, incidentally, the ticket is free. They can keep on writing what they have to write, but they cannot move a brick here. We will do what helps in our supreme national interest. And whatever is applicable from Hari, that is applicable for Henry, that is applicable for Halim. We have no difference of any kind. There is no discrimination here. If there is no discrimination here, you cannot cry foul. You are only not being able to run your agendas. Your masters are not paying you. You are not getting the funding. Paisa nahi aa raha, to isliye you are getting rattled. But that is your problem. Live with it. Our time has come. You cannot deny us that. So, कहते हैं ना, राम का नाम लो और भजन गाओ. Jai Shri Ram.
Gautam, what do you make of this? Is this a case of Washington Post going marta kya na karta? They have to, pick up topics which are going to keep them relevant. And for India, should we have such strong reactions? Because this is something like Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee also pointed out is going to be, very frequent. Should this be a case for India, like they say, of letting sleeping dogs lie?
Well, I think we have every right to censor something which is patently false, and we should not be defensive about it. They do it, we do it. And as Sumit pointed out, there are dozens and dozens of countries which are far less liberal than we are. And so to malign us is something that was working under the previous leadership of Twitter in an infamous capacity, as we pointed out. Now, not so much, because the owner is not, keen on maligning India. He's hoping to enter India both with his Starlink and the Tesla cars, and he's a visionary, so there could be many other things that he could bring to the table. As far as the Washington Post, I often wonder, why do they write about India? Because there is no readership in America on Indian matters. The average American couldn't care less what's happening all the way in India. So this is written in the Washington Post for us to read over here and get agitated. And we should really stop doing that. Economist ditto, Guardian ditto, BBC has recently coughed up the tax it wasn't paying because they actually are slipping in terms of viewership and everything like that. They also have a digital channel, and they depend on the size and the numbers in India to stay afloat, and so they paid up about 40 crores, which earlier they didn't. Twitter is, as I said, quite happy to play ball. Facebook is beginning to do so. We have developed some of our own digital platforms which are growing, but still a long way to go. But for these people to pick up Indian topics is itself foolish, because in their home country they have no readership. So why are they aiming it at us all the way across the seas, when neither the broad Indian voter knows them or cares what they have to say. If they're trying to needle the government or the intelligentsia here, the days are gone when we tend to be defensive. We are equally capable of giving it back and ridiculing them for their Chinese financing, for their Islamic leanings, and the total kind of fraudulent journalism that they practice. So it's not working at all, and they should get a life, because by 2030 we will be in a position of strength, but will they even exist? Beneath.
Right. Professor Giri, do you concur with what Gautam just said, that this content that is put out in Washington Post, which is of course derogatory in nature, is not for the consumption of the average American? It is written to spite us. Professor Giri? All right, problem with your connection. I'm going to take that same question. Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
I can't hear
Okay, sir.
you.
There seems to be a problem with your network. We'll have to come back to you. Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, same question for you, ma'am. Do you think this content is written to spite India? I would differ. I would still feel, there is a growing interest for what's happening in India, in the last few years, ever since Prime Minister Modi came along. Ma'am, you're muted.
No, I'm
okay,
not.
There you go. Now you are.
I am saying, Vineet, that I agree with Gautam. That Americans have zero interest in India. In fact, when I was posted in New York many years ago, I was amazed that there was so much interest in what we in India consider to be trivial or scandalous news, and actually those journals would sell much better than serious journals which talk on foreign policy or the future of the world or the future of United States of America. In fact, many Americans don't even care about what's happening in America, forget about India. So I would completely agree with Gautam on that point. As to why they keep on writing these stories which are fraudulent, fake, and just plain hurtful if you have a thin skin, is because they are controlled by people who resent India's rise and would like India to toe their line, which our present government does not do. So there is an anti-Indian government vein in Washington Post, and there are people within India, unfortunately, including political parties, NGOs and individuals, who also encourage the Washington Post and Economist to write such stuff about India, and sometimes very helpfully provide them with information which is available freely in Indian social media, on Indian media, and on TV debates. So, unlike China, we are indeed the low-hanging fruit, because we are low-hanging because information is freely available. We are low-hanging because we are slow to take revenge. And we are low-hanging because we have democratic institutions that stop us from taking the kind of draconian measures that a Xi Jinping would take. That's why we are low-hanging fruit, unfortunately. The low-hanging fruit becomes to the West, the more swipes they'll take on us. So, as I said, we just have to develop a thick skin and understand that nobody in this 1.3 billion great nation of ours cares a hoot about the Washington Post, except a few individuals who like to debate it on television like you and me, Beneath, and a few others who imagine that an article critical of India in the Washington Post will influence votes in some remote village in Uttar Pradesh or Bengal, where I come from. It will not. There are the same bread and butter issues that influence the voter, which also influence voters in the West. Democracy is the same everywhere. The voter wants development. What does the voter care about the rules of internet usage in India? In the United States, there are still people, Vineet, for example, the United States president before 9/11 did not know the name of the capital of Pakistan. And he was well-educated American. So that is their level of knowledge, Vineet. There are many of them who don't know the world outside the borders of the United States. Unfortunately for them, Indians are much better read, including totally illiterate people. Go to West Bengal and see how they'll debate you on every issue. So we are much more aware of what's going on in India and outside India. But no, we are not aware of the Washington Post. They can keep on publishing. We don't care. I don't care at any rate. And I do read the Washington Post from time to time.
Sumit, what do you make of this? Ambassador Mukherjee says that there are people within our country who facilitate, this banter, this, this negative creation of India's image in some of these foreign outlets. How true do you think that is? And what should be done about it?
Vineet, in this country, we had even a super prime minister. In this country, we had a cabinet which was about the cabinet ministers, cabinet ministers. In this country, we had super journalists also. So what ma'am is saying is absolutely right. There have been a lot of power centers which are outside the main power center. And we had a prime minister who used to always say coalition dharma. So when you combine all the things and make unbind the things, you will see what a cocktail it was. There were some PR agencies who could decide which cabinet minister will get what. Will you get a promotion? Will you get a transfer? And there were some journalists who were working hand in glove with them. So when this all cabal is already operational, we had seen them. It's only after the Prime Minister Modi came to power, the whole cabal got dismantled. They have nothing to do. So some of them are running YouTube channels now instantly, which is good. So, they are out of the TV. So this is where they have landed. And when these are the people who typically collaborate, because what do they want to say? They want to say, look, this Washington Post are the words of the Bible. It is the Holy Quran. If Washington Post says we are going to have 50 million Indian dead, we will have 50 million. Man ke chalo. If we are saying our economy is collapsing, gai. If we are saying we are poor, khatam. Yesterday, I'll tell you, Vineet, on Dhanteras, the shopping of gold and the Dhanteras, related commodities with gold, silver, and a few cars and all was 50,000 crores. Yet they say our economy is not doing good at all. 50,000 crores one day, 27,000 crores of only gold was sold. Yesterday, I'm talking of Dhanteras. So when these all things are happening, India is rising. So how do they control those? So they are the people. It's like a batting and bowling. They do the bowling. They give them a flighted ball. Then the people over here know how to, send it outside the boundary line and do a chakka. That is what they are doing here. So this batting bowling concept is what they are doing. This Washington Post becomes the epitome of intellect, epitome of journalism, epitome of truth, and epitome of liberty, fraternity, and freedom of speech in the world. Because it is in Washington Post, so it has to be true. Because we are quoting Washington Post, it has to be true. I mentioned about Cambridge Analytica. I mentioned about these fake Twitter handles. I mentioned about how the law and order was getting influenced here. With such a things happening, we have our full right to protect the interests of the country, to protect the people of the country. We don't want anything to happen here, right? We are a fastest growing economy in the world, and we want it to be so. So if these people still live in a colonial hangover, they still live in the imperial past, and imperial arrogance is what has been driving them for years. Well, there's a time you always wake up and change. If you are not going to change, you are going to become as important, as relevant as dinosaurs are today. So if you want to become one, welcome to the party. Ticket is free.
Professor Giri is back with us. Good point there, Sumit. Professor Giri, I hope we can hear you now, sir.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sir, Washington Post and their unsolicited agendas against India, they of course have no bearing on India's ascent, but the fact of the matter is they definitely have a bearing on how the world looks at Washington Post with a great deal of suspicion, because this is not what journalism is about.
Well, the media all over the world has their strange logic of working. We criticize Washington Post and many others. A lot of people will criticize our media as well. But I would say we should not be sentimental in reacting. If there is a story which is containing falsehood, we react to it as the minister has done. And as a growing and matured democracy, or as my fellow panelists are saying.
It's not the only story, sir. They keep doing these stories all the time.
I do that. Yeah, the Washington Post and BBC criticize their own governments as well. Fair enough. So you can't ban Washington Post from here. We can only engage with it. My point is that we should be not be defensive, not reacting sentimentally and dismissing it. We engage with these stories. If you give any credit, any importance to Washington Post, or ignore it. My point is, media is supposed to be free everywhere. And what they say, there are laws also to regulate media. And anything that appears in the media, to dismiss it and to be condescending about it is not fair. That is what that would be my point. And it is a malicious story. Fair enough, we say so. If they are doing it consistently, they may have an agenda.
Right,
I don't know who is financing them. I don't know who finances which media. A media has, I told you, is a strange logic of their governance and their conduct, But as consumers of media, we need to engage with it. And there are laws that regulate media as well. If there is a story negative about India, I don't think we should be over sentimental about it.
I would like to say something here, Giri.
Okay, Ambassador Mukherjee wants to weigh in on what you said. Quickly, ma'am.
After Dr. Giri has finished, then I can.
We've almost run out of time, ma'am. Please go ahead. Please go ahead, ma'am.
I had just a small thing. Fair enough. Go ahead. Yeah.
It was not to counter what he said. I just wanted to make the point that, in fact, we do engage with foreign media. I've been ambassador in a very difficult country at one point. It was with India, that is Netherlands. And we have a policy of engaging foreign media everywhere. That certainly includes the Washington Post, as far as our embassy in Washington is concerned, etc. Usually, when we engage with foreign media, the result is that foreign media always carries a proper Indian perspective on pieces they do. When they don't do it, and I can assure you, sir, that Washington Post, we have engaged with Washington Post for decades now. We have extremely competent press officers at a very senior level to engage with Washington Post. But if they continue to bring, quoting what Mr. Giri said,
right,
malicious materials, then it would appear that they have an agenda. And who controls it? It's very simple.
That's exactly what I said, ma'am. If they keep doing it,
by corporates allied to particular political parties. And therefore, it would seem to me that the so-called myth of the free media in the West is increasingly being challenged by the manner in which they write, including about India, because even after you engage with...
Understood, ma'am. Ma'am, we've run out of time. Apologies for that. We've run out of time. Would like to thank all my guests for being a part of this wonderful conversation.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.